I'm John Chowning for Dialogue on Public Issues with Campbellsville University. Today, my guest is a gentleman, elected official who's been a guest of mine on prior occasions, the Honorable Michael Adams, Kentucky Secretary of State. Secretary Adams, welcome back.
Thank you, John. It's great to be back.
How are things going in Frankfort these days?
Well, surprisingly smoothly. I've got some good news to share with you over the course of the program, but our election planning has gone very well, and I'm confident we're going to have a successful and safe election.
Excellent. Share with us an assessment how the expanded balloting, absentee balloting for the June primary went. There was a lot of discussion. You and I did an interview prior to that election. How did that work?
Well, I'll be the first to admit that I was cautiously optimistic about changing our election rules so close to an election and doing our system so differently, more cautious than optimistic. But it went very well. In fact, we became a national success story for how well we ran our election. We didn't create things out of whole cloth. We've had absentee balloting as a right in our state constitution since 1945, but usually only 2% of voters utilize it. In June, 75% of voters utilized it. That put a big strain on our county clerks and our postal system, but fortunately we were able to pull this off very successfully. One of the changes we're making for November is we're leaving absentee voting intact for those who need it, but we're encouraging people to vote in person if they can, and we're going to have a lot more locations available in November than we had in June.
Were there lessons learned, and I think you've already touched on that a bit, but lessons learned from the June primary that are applicable as we move toward the November election?
There certainly were. I'd say the biggest lesson learned was I deferred too much to the county clerks to design their election plans for their localities. I still believe in decentralized elections. I think that they know more than I do about what facts are on the ground, but I think I gave them a little bit too much deference in coming up with those plans. And so one change for November is now I have to sign off on the plans. I've gotten maybe 60, 70 plans submitted so far from the county clerks. I've approved 48 of them. Only one of those county plans has just one place to go vote. That's Nicholas County, where there's normally just two places to go vote. The vast majority of these plans have a significant expansion of in-person voting. And in fact, I've got 9 counties so far that opened up every single precinct. That's due in part to their great work at the county clerk level, and also my staff deserves some credit. We've been very vigorous this year, letting people know we need poll workers, and we've used different media to go recruit and attract poll workers, and it's showing results.
Now, you and the governor recently announced guidelines that you've already alluded to for absentee and early voting for the upcoming November 3rd general election. What are some of the major highlights of these new guidelines and regulations that have been agreed to?
So the first big difference is last time we encouraged everyone to vote by absentee ballot. That was necessary for most people to do that because we just didn't have places for them to go vote. Our poll workers evaporated overnight. Our locations that normally offer to be polling sites, they disappeared overnight. So we had to pivot significantly to absentee voting. We're not doing that this time. We preserve that as an option for people who need it, whether due to their age or health condition or someone they're in contact with who's got an age or health condition that makes them vulnerable to this virus. We encourage all those folks to vote absentee. But right now, we don't think that absentee voting is going to be the way that most people in Kentucky vote. As of yesterday, we've had 321,000 requests for an absentee ballot, which sounds like a lot, but that's actually 80,000 less than we had at this point in the process last time. And this is with a turnout model that's going to be 2.5 times the turnout we had in the primary. We had 29% turnout in the primary. That's really good for a primary. We're thinking 72% of voters will vote in November. It's a big increase, but we've not seen that sort of increase in the absentee ballot requests. It's really on track to be what we had last time or even fewer. Again, we want to preserve this for those who need it. But we don't want to put too much strain on our county clerks to process all these or on the postal system. So most voters are going to vote in person. And so we've worked really hard to find new locations, to reopen precincts where we could, and to go get new poll workers. Our office alone recruited 4,000 poll workers of the 15,000 we would need to run a traditional Kentucky election. It's not even our job to do that. It's the clerk's job, but we've been good partners trying to help the clerks.
Now, how can Kentucky voters apply for absentee ballots at this point?
So we opened the portal earlier. Last time, the governor and I reached an agreement in late April, and it took us a month to build the portal from scratch. This time, the portal, we just flipped the switch. It's been open since about mid-August. Any voter who wants to vote absentee can go to govoteky.com. That's the same website you can register to vote at until 4 p.m. on October 5th. You can register to vote. You can update your voter information. You can ask for an absentee ballot. You can volunteer to be a poll worker. You can even track your absentee ballot electronically the way you track a UPS package. So it's the same method of request. You can also get it from your clerk. But this is very important. Last time we turned off the request function 8 days before the election. That meant we really had a rush of people voting at the very end, getting their ballots last minute. This time we both opened the portal earlier in the process and we're closing it earlier. October 9th at 11:59 p.m. is going to be the deadline to request an absentee ballot. So I want all voters to make a plan. How do you want to vote? You got 4 options: absentee ballot by mail, absentee ballot delivered to a drop box, or in-person voting early, or November 3rd election day voting in person. You got 4 options. They're all great options. Pick one that's right for you and then follow that plan. Don't ask for an absentee ballot and then show up in person. We're going to catch you and prosecute you.
Now, what are the deadlines for returning an absentee ballot?
So the deadline to return it to us, either to hand deliver it to your county clerk in the drop boxes that we've bought for them, or to mail it back if you mail it, is election day, 6 p.m. election day. Now that's 6 p.m. is the deadline to drop it in the box or to vote in person. Your deadlines for your local postal carrier will differ on when they'll postmark that ballot, but it's got to be postmarked election day or before. If we get your ballot after election day and it's not postmarked election day or earlier, we're not able to count it. We can't just take ballots coming in after the election and blindly accept them. So we encourage people, if you're concerned about the postal system, losing your ballot or delaying your ballot or not postmarking your ballot, then by all means take advantage of the drop boxes we're providing. It also saves the state some money on the postage. I just testified today to the legislature that it's going to cost the state about $5 million extra, and of that, $4 million is postage. So every ballot that isn't mailed back to us, that saves us some money.
One of the concerns expressed about this expanded absentee balloting in the primary and mail-in voting in general is whether the ballots will get, particularly those that are mailed, will get to the county clerk's office by the November 3rd deadline. Were there any problems with that in the primary, and do you anticipate there being any widespread problems here in Kentucky for the November 3rd election?
Well, in the primary, it actually went very smoothly. Again, we had 29% turnout, so we had a manageable number of absentee ballots. We didn't have a situation where we had large numbers of ballots that came in too late that were postmarked timely. We had voters who returned their ballots after election day, and we can't count those. The election's over. So you do have voter error. You have voters who don't follow the rules, and then unfortunately we're not able to count their votes. But no, we didn't have a problem with the Postal Service delaying delivery of ballots that were timely cast by the voter. Fortunately, we actually had a good experience with the postal system.
What is the deadline for registration to vote in the November election?
You have until October 5th at 4 p.m. to register to vote. You can do that at govoteky.com, or you can get a card from your county clerk if you prefer to do that. But October 5th is that deadline. And I want to make a quick point if I could. Sure. Voter registration. National Voter Registration Day is September 22nd. We've done a lot of stuff recently to highlight registration. Let me give you some unfortunate statistics. Over the last summer, we had 267,000 new Kentucky voters register. It was in a gubernatorial year where we had 19% voter turnout in our primary and 42% voter turnout in our general election. In that context, we had over 250,000 new registrants over the summer. Year over year, those numbers for 2020, we had 21,000 new voters. That's a drop of about 90%, 21,000 new voters. And this is in a year with 29% primary turnout and probably turnout in November of over 70%. We've not seen registration keep up with voter interest. And the reason for that is it's so difficult right now to do a voter registration drive. The political parties are handicapped in doing that. Civic organizations are handicapped in doing that. I was supposed to go to the state fair for a week and register voters at a booth. We had to cancel that too. They canceled all of us doing that. So it's hard on the government. It's hard on the private sector and interest groups and everyone else to register voters. But I just want to, again, let everyone know you don't have to get a card from someone. You can go online to govoteky.com. It's just as good.
What are the current approximate numbers, registration-wise, for the state, the percentages of party registration?
Well, over the last roughly a year or so, you've seen the Republican Party growing in registration and the Democratic Party losing some market share. When I was growing up, gosh, the state was at 60% registered Democrats or higher. I'd say in the last year, Democrats they're still in first place. They've got a plurality, but they've dropped beneath a majority. Right now, we're at about 48% of voters registered Democratic, 43% of voters registered Republican, and the rest are other. They're either independents or libertarians or what have you. And over time, it's hard to say when, but I think if the current trend continues, then over time, Republicans will have a majority in registration. I don't know how long it's going to take. I know of two counties that just last month just flipped red in the registration. Barron, and I don't recall the other off the top of my head, I think Pendleton.
Those both historically been very Democratic counties, I might add. And Kentucky is definitely, unless something changes dramatically, headed in that direction, it would appear.
Well, to be fair,
go ahead, please.
Yeah, just to be fair to Democrats, you're seeing a lot of Democrats change to Republican. You're also seeing some Republicans change to Democratic. The urban areas are getting more Democratic. I lost Jefferson was my worst county. I live in Jefferson, but I lost it by 35 points. It's a county that 4 years ago, several Republicans won. They all lost it last year. So you're seeing a sorting. You're seeing this nationally too. The urban areas are getting more Democratic and the rural areas are getting more Republican. But Kentucky's a rural state, so this works to the benefit mostly of the Republican Party.
What is done in Kentucky to protect against election fraud, November 3rd general election? What are some of the protections that are in place, and how would you assess the degree of election fraud in Kentucky?
Well, I won't make any bones about it. I ran for this office primarily focused with a platform of combating election fraud. During my campaign, I was very clear that I would only make responsible claims and allegations. I wouldn't suggest that we have rigged elections as a general practice, that we don't have rigged statewide elections. It's just not feasible, and it hasn't been for 70 years to rig a statewide election in Kentucky. However, I also offered 22 specific cases of not just allegations, but criminal convictions of individuals for election fraud in Kentucky over the last decade and a half. So it does happen. When it happens, though, it's generally at the local level. You've got the motive and the opportunity. You've got the motive of someone running for mayor or county judge, running for a local office that has patronage. This is a big deal in a small, poor county, usually in eastern Kentucky. If someone can get control of the payroll for the government office, that's the biggest employer in town. And you have opportunity because you've got poor folks who are willing to sell their vote for $50. You don't have that everywhere in the state, but you do in certain parts of the state. So it's a perfect storm. But I'm very proud to say that our election in June was the first I can even remember where there wasn't vote fraud. And it's not for lack of looking. I have a ballot integrity task force I formed with Attorney General Daniel Cameron, with federal prosecutors, with the state police, with others, and we surveil every aspect of the election. We look at every request online for a ballot. We look at people on the inactive list who are scheduled to be purged, who pop up and vote. We look at every aspect of this election, and I can't remember an election, even under normal circumstances, in my career where there's not been a vote fraud case to come out of it. So we did have an allegation in Davis County of an individual attempting to vote twice. This individual mailed back an absentee ballot and also voted in person. But we've got controls for that. We caught that absentee ballot and spoiled it and didn't let that count. And then we refer that individual to the local grand jury. So we take this very seriously, but we've got controls in place. Electronically, we know that you voted already or that you've asked for a ballot and you can't vote a second time. We check signatures on every single ballot envelope. If you're voting absentee, we verify your identity. And starting in November for the first time, or actually in October for early voting, for the first time in our state history, there's a photo ID law in the books that I ran on, help write and pass. So we've never had elections so secure as we've had them this year.
One of the areas that you ran on was to have the ability to remove names off the voter registration rolls after a certain period of time, those who have moved out of state, those who have passed away, people whose names may be multiply registered in different places, and so on. What progress have you made on that? And I know you haven't solved all of that in the short time you've been in office, but I know there have been some moves in that direction.
I'm very proud of what we've been able to achieve in just the 8 months that I've been here. As you noted, I ran last year on taking voters off of our rolls who have moved away, passed away, or been put away. Our rolls haven't been maintained since 2009, 3 secretaries of state ago. That's not coming from me. That's coming from a federal judge. There was litigation against my predecessor. A judge looked at this and he issued a decision and found against my predecessor. So this is serious business. You can't have voter rolls full of people who aren't real. So I've taken very aggressive efforts. I've followed the law. I'm not mass purging people, certainly not with an election coming. That wouldn't be fair. But we are taking steps and making progress. In the campaign, I said the number was 200,000 voters that were inactive and that should come off our rolls. I was wrong. It was 400,000. The way I found that out was I sent out a postcard back in the spring to people with information on how to vote in the primary. The dual purpose of that mailer was we got 400,000 of those back. We've got a room in Frankfurt that's to the roof with postcards returned from people who aren't around anymore. And it takes time to process all that, but we've made a lot of progress. We've had months I've been in office, and we took more dead voters off the rolls than we added live voters. To be clear, we're not purging people without a good reason. We've been very transparent about who were taken off and why. If you're dead, you're coming off. If you've moved away, we don't take you off automatically. We proactively send you a letter. My predecessor didn't do this. We actually find that voter, we send that voter a letter and say, hey, we want to confirm you're dual registered and you need to come off of our rolls. Otherwise, there's a risk they could vote twice in a presidential election that obviously is problematic. And so we're taking voters off our rolls every single day for all these various reasons. And we've made significant progress. To be clear, it's going to take probably a couple of years to get totally caught up. This is a mammoth amount of data entry and work. And again, I'm getting direct consent from some of these voters to come off. I have to do that by law. But we're making a lot of progress really, really fast.
Again, I think it's important to stress the fact this is not an arbitrary removal of people. The law prescribes a process. Obviously, those who have passed away need to be removed, but those who have moved even, you don't just remove their name automatically. There's a process you have to go through by law.
That's right. I don't, and even if I wanted to, I can't. There's federal and state law that governs maintenance of your rolls, and you can't take off a living person without their permission unless they've been judged insane or they've committed a felony. And so we're not doing that, but we are going out of our way to reach them and get their consent to take them off.
Sure. What percentage turnout do you expect in Kentucky for the November 3rd election, Mr. Secretary?
Well, the rough rule of thumb is your primary turnout times 2.5 is your general election turnout. That would be 72% if that translates. But I'll tell you, I think it's actually going to be higher. Here's why I think that. I just communicated yesterday with the county clerk in Campbell County. It's a big county in northern Kentucky. Northern Kentucky historically has lower turnout than the rest of the state. They're in the Cincinnati media market. There's not much attention in their media about Kentucky elections. It's more Ohio. They usually have lower turnout. The county clerk in Campbell's projecting 75% turnout for Campbell County. If we're having 75% in Campbell County, it's going to be north of 80% statewide. It could be really historic.
What races are on the ballot this year? And which of those would you think are the most contested races, obviously?
Well, we have the President of the United States on the ballot. We've got 5 candidates for president, President Trump, former Vice President Biden, a Libertarian candidate, and 2 independent candidates. We have Senator McConnell and his opponent, Amy McGrath, and a Libertarian. We have all the members of Congress. All 6 of them have races. We've got the entire state House of Representatives and half of the state Senate up. Various localities around the state have local races. Paducah does. I think Nicholasville does. Those are set by local ordinance. We also have 2 constitutional amendments. We have the so-called Marsy's Law, Victims' Bill of Rights bill that actually was on the ballot in 2018, but the votes were not counted by order of the state Supreme Court. So that's getting a do-over in November. And there's a second constitutional amendment about changing the terms of office of state judges, district judges.
Okay. So the ballot will be fairly lengthy in some locations.
It will, and actually that's been a factor to me in the cost of the election and the desire to not over-rely on absentee balloting. This is a long ballot. The constitutional amendments now under the Supreme Court decision, we have to list every word of the amendment, not just offer a summary. So I do want voters to understand, look, I get it. Everyone's impatient. I am too. We want to vote. But it's going to take time for a voter to go into the booth and read this whole ballot. It's going to take time to do it if you're getting it at home as well. So we do ask people to be patient. We're aware that the lines are going to be long and people are 6 feet apart, but we're going to do our best.
Part of the problem with the Marsy's Law amendment was the fact that the court, as I remember, ruled that there was not sufficient length of information on the ballot for voters to make a right decision. Is that correct?
That's right. The state Supreme Court decided that they read the Constitution to say that you have to list every word of the amendment, not just summarize it. I don't know if they're right or wrong on that, but I will tell you they've made our elections a lot harder because now I've got to have every word on the ballot, and that means fewer people are going to vote in it. They're not going to read all these words. So I think that was an impractical decision. I'm not going to second guess their legal judgment,
right.
But practically speaking, it's an unfortunate decision.
Do you anticipate any delays in Kentucky returns in this election as there were in the primary?
Well, we made progress on that front. This time, the governor and I, in our agreement, we required the county clerks to report their results on election night. That doesn't mean that every vote will be counted at that point. It's going to take time to process all these absentee ballots that come in late, if they do. But this time, we are requiring all the clerks to process all their returns that they've got, all their 3 weeks of in-person voting, plus all the absentee ballots that they've received back via mail or drop box, to count them all and report them on election night. My belief is that instead of 25% of the vote in election night as we had in June, and then waiting a week to get the other 75%, we're going to have 75 or 80% of the votes counted election night. And we're going to have to wait maybe a few days for all the rest to be counted. We're allowing 3 days for ballots to come in the mail that have been postmarked on election day or earlier. But we think that the vast majority of votes will be in and counted in public election night. In Kentucky, historically, we're the first state in the union to put up our points on the board for who we want to be the president. My hope is to also be number one in the country this year on that. I do want to prepare America and Kentucky for this. Other states are not doing it the way we're doing it. Other states are vote by mail states or have different rules than us, and they're not requiring a fast count. We may not know who the president is for a week or two. Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, a lot of swing states, they're not being as vigorous as Kentucky is going to be in offering prompt election results. So we may know who won legislative races or the Senate race here and we'll know who won our state for president, but we're not necessarily going to know election night who the next president's going to be.
That brings me to a question I wanted to ask you. You're a Secretary of State, Chief Election Officer. You're active with the national organization. You're respected across the nation as an expert on election law and observer of elections. Do you share concern about that fact, that there will be such a potentially long delay, particularly if the race is very, very close in the context of the not only the popular vote, but more importantly, obviously, in the outcome, the swing states, as they're called, those few states that put Donald Trump into the White House, which are again up for grabs in this election. If those states go into the wee hours of the night, and as you said, some of them like Pennsylvania, maybe a week or two before we know, does that raise great concerns in your mind?
It does raise concerns. It doesn't raise concerns about the fairness of the election, about the integrity of the election. Look, there are models of election policy around the country that I don't like, and I would never accept in Kentucky. Sure. But to be clear, the people that are running these operations, the county clerks, the secretaries of state of both parties, they're people of integrity. I work with them every day. They want a fair election in their state, whether it helps their candidate or not. Here's what I'm really concerned about is the public acceptance. There is a phenomenon where Democrats are likelier to trust and rely on absentee voting and vote by mail in those states than Republicans. My guess is that Republicans win big on election day here in Kentucky and maybe across the country, but then you're going to have a bunch of votes coming in, absentee ballot or vote by mail states, where slowly the numbers come in that way and it skews to the Democrats. And you could have individuals who are up on election day who lose later. And that makes people suspect that there's something up to no good. People don't realize that there's a different constituency voting absentee than voting in person. Republicans ideologically want to vote in person, and Democrats ideologically before the pandemic wanted to move to mail-based systems. So I do want to reassure Kentuckians and everyone that just because people vote differently based on their politics doesn't mean that our elections aren't fair and credible.
Looking to the 2021 General Assembly session, kind of changing subject, looking forward beyond November 3rd, what are some priorities of your office beyond the COVID-19 pandemic, beyond the 2020 election cycle? What are some of your priorities going forward?
Well, I haven't had an opportunity to focus much on that yet. I'll sit down with my team after the November election. We've got the bandwidth to think about January and February, and we'll come up with some suggestions. I think we may offer some suggestions for reform on the business side. I'm the chief business officer as well as the chief election officer. I do plan to go to the legislature with some election reforms. One of them is I'd like to make the portal permanent. I don't think that we're ever going to go back to 2% absentee voting in Kentucky. And it's not because we need to change our laws necessarily. To keep doing what we've done this year, we would have to change our laws. We did this by emergency powers of my office this year, but that goes away after the emergency. But that said, I think way more Kentuckians than the 2% who voted historically by absentee ballot are going to be using absentee ballots going forward. More than 2% of our population is elderly or health compromised, especially in Kentucky, given our health status. And so I think historically going forward, not most, but way more voters are going to vote absentee than historically have. Our system has to be able to account for that. I think a portal is a good idea permanently. It's good because it facilitates ease for the clerk and for the voter, and also because it offers transparency. So I know and the clerk knows and the voter knows where the ballot is at all times. That's a really good system. I also want to make permanent the cure system. Kentucky law has no process in statute for curing an absentee ballot if the voter makes an error. We had tens of thousands of voters commit errors on their ballots that normally would cause them to not be counted, but we were able to proactively find the voters and give them a chance to cure their mistakes so their ballot could count. That was something that we made up in our office. It's not something that exists by law, but it should. And so again, when this election is over and this emergency is over, my powers evaporate. I turn back into a pumpkin, and everything that we had before is the default that takes place again. So thus, for us to have permanent improvements, we have to make changes to our laws, and those are two I plan on pushing.
Secretary Michael Adams, Secretary of State of Kentucky, we're out of time. Thank you, sir, once again, giving us access for this interview. We want to wish you well during this election season. Thank you for your hard work, you and your team, and thank our viewers for being with us today for Dialogue on Public Issues.